Hi, I'm Jim Maltese, Vice President of Quality Standards at Level 3 Audiovisual, and welcome to the Qualiverse. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about intelligibility. I have been accused of not listening to my wife many times in the past. And I should preface this by saying that I love my wife dearly, and on date nights or after the kids go to sleep, I am very attentive. However, there are times during the weekends where I might be upstairs listening to a podcast, the kids are downstairs fighting about what to have for lunch, and there's a lot of noise. There's even background music playing, and my wife picks that time to ask me from all the way downstairs, probably at a whisper, "Hey, can you take the trash out?" Now, fast forward an hour later, and the trash has not been taken out. My wife argues that I wasn't listening. I argue that her public address system did not have adequate intelligibility. That didn't go over well, but the science, I think, was on my side. The whole point of public address and speech reinforcement systems are to distribute voice audio from a talker to all expected listeners in an intelligible manner. Listeners should not have to struggle to listen to what is being said by a properly installed audio system. Anyone who has attended a graduation ceremony in a middle school gymnasium with horrible acoustics can attest to how fatiguing and difficult it can be to understand what is being said when the system's intelligibility is not adequate. And that's just a cute little ceremony. Imagine struggling to understand what is being said during an emergency evacuation in a city or in a large building. So, measuring the ability of the system to accurately distribute audio signals is an incredibly important performance requirement and one that is often overlooked. And so, why don't integrators and technology managers demand that the intelligibility of their systems be measured? I mean, my guess is that they might not know that they can. And to be fair, it used to be very difficult and subjective to quantify how accurately a system is delivering audio. And if you think about it, human speech is such a complex waveform generated from so many varying sources being transmitted to myriad unique receivers. Everyone's voice is unique. Everyone's ears are unique. Is it even possible to measure something as complex as speech reinforcement? Well, they tried. Of course, they tried. Just after World War II, scientists were trying to improve communication methods, ostensibly for marine and airplane radio traffic. So, as such, they needed to devise a scheme to measure speech quality. Speech quality, that's the term they used. They came up with 720 phonetically balanced sentences that use the phonemes at similar frequencies as they happen during English. So when we speak English in particular, we have a certain balance or ratio of vowels to consonants, certain lengths of words that are used in typical sentences. And so these 720 Harvard sentences mimicked that frequency, that the type of speech that is typically commonly found in English. And they're somewhat nonsensical or uncommon on purpose, so that when someone says them through some type of system, the listener has to rely on the speech quality or intelligibility of the system to determine the actual words used. So, an example would be someone saying, "Tea served from the brown jug is tasty." That's the source. "Tea served from the brown jug is tasty." Now, the receiver would have to interpret what they heard. Was it tea served or was it teas served? Was it from the brown jug or from a brown jug? They're all that phonetic information that they have to interpret. Or did they really just say tea soaked in LeBron James is tasty? That'd be a little weird, but that was an actual mishearing of the phrase during testing performed at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. So this is legit stuff. This is what we're dealing with, especially in systems that might not have the best intelligibility. You can see how certain consonants, certain sounds could get lost in the mix. It's like a game of telephone. Or additionally, if we're talking through a regular POTS, like a regular phone system, old school phone system without this wide bandwidth stuff that we've got today, where you can't tell the difference between an S and an F. And that's why we have that phonetic alphabet: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, etc. It's to make that differentiation, which might not be able to be distinguished through the intelligibility of the system under test. So this was a great first step, right? The understanding these sentences, figuring out how it was received, how well it was received, how accurately it was received. That was a great first step. But obviously, it's going to be very time consuming, right? Could you imagine hiring all these different talkers, all these different listeners, taking in all that information, figuring out how accurate it is? It gets crazy. So it's very time consuming. It's expensive. It's subjective. What if you have certain different talkers, different listeners? It's not repeatable, right? And so something else was required. Enter the Speech Transmission Index, or STI. This genius methodology understood that speech is very complex. To measure intelligibility, we have to look at audio information across the entire frequency band of speech. So from 125 hertz to 8 kilohertz. That is where the vast majority of human speech is contained. And we also need to look at the audio signal at different modulations to capture the effect the system. So when I'm talking about the system, I'm talking about the microphone, the mixer, the amplifier, the loudspeaker, the room, the reflections, the reverberation, that entire system. We want to know what the effect the system has on the speech, and then we can determine something called the modulator transfer function. That transfer function is what that system does to that source material. So by modulating the source at different frequencies, we can get a sense of the impact, the background noise, the reverberation, any echo, any poor signal to noise in the system, from the room, from the technology, what impact that has on the audio. So STI takes audio in each speech octave band, modulates it at 14 different frequencies, normalizes it, and that just means it puts it on a scale from 0 to 1. And then out of that, we get 98 points of data to play with. So we've got those 14 modulating frequencies, and we've got to measure them across 7 bands. So 7 times 14, we get 98 data points to interpret what that transfer function is. Now, knowing that STI matrix, all those different data points can clue us in as to what the room contributions are doing to that audio, whether it's a noisy space, is it a reverberant space, is it have a distinct echo? But that's a lot. It's a lot of information, and people want an easy to understand, easy to consume description of how intelligible the system is. So STI takes this normalized matrix of 98 data points and reduces it down as a weighted sum to one number, the intelligibility index for the entire space. Basically, it's a number from 0 to 1. It's normalized. And if the intelligibility is 0 to 0.3, it's just bad, right? We want to make it even easier to consume than a number. So 0 to 0.3, it's bad intelligibility. 0.3 to 0.45, poor. 0.45 to 0.6, it's fair. Still not good, but fair. 0.6 to 0.75, it's good. And anything above 0.75, 0.75 to 1.0 is excellent. It is very difficult to have a real world space with higher than 0.85 intelligibility. It's quite difficult. In fact, you can put a microphone right up to a calibrated source, and you're only going to get about 0.95. So that's no room contribution, very little room contribution. So getting above 0.85 is very, very difficult. That'd be like a broadcast space or something, some really high-end theater. Most of our conference spaces are going to be 0.7, 0.75. So definitely well within the good range. So as great as this method is, it takes time and processing power. To come up with that one number, that STI, takes about 15 minutes. So obviously, when we take that measurement, we want to do it a few times to assure it's accurate, and we want to do it at several locations in the room to get a sampling of the listening positions. To measure intelligibility can take several hours, right? With all those different test points, and that gets expensive to perform one single test. It also begs the question, do we really need all 98 points of data in that MTF metrics? So if you're thinking no, well, a lot of people did. And enter the Room Acoustic Speech Transmission Index, affectionately referred to as RASTI. Instead of modulating the signal at 14 different frequencies across the 7 octaves for 98 data points, what if we only took 10 measurements in the 500 hertz and 2 kilohertz bands? So it was definitely a step in the right direction. The time went down, but audio analyzers are becoming smaller. They're becoming less expensive. More and more people had it. This RASTI measurement was rendered obsolete with the introduction of the current preferred speech quality index, Speech Transmission Index for Public Address, STIPA. STIPA looks at the 7 octaves at 14 modulation frequencies, but by using a modulated noise source and only measuring 14 of those 98 data points, which is 2 per octave, still pretty good, the time to perform a measurements and the time to compute the result is greatly reduced. So we take it from 15 minutes for the speech transmission index, that's the big mama, that 15 minutes is reduced to about 10 seconds for STIPA. So this is clearly the way. This we can do. It's repeatable. Still looks at the entire frequency band. It's inexpensive, right? We can do it on a handheld analyzer, and it gives us good information. And there's actually also something called Speech Transmission Index for Telecommunication Systems, or STITEL, which is another simplified version of STI. It only measures 7 modulation frequencies across the 7 octave band. So STIPA has 2, STITEL only has 1 per band. So STIPA is actually more rigorous. And as long as vocoders aren't used in the audio compression algorithms, STITEL or STIPA may be a valid way to measure intelligibility through a conferencing system. And how useful would that be? I mean, that'd be pretty cool. If people are saying, I can't understand the words that are coming out of people's mouths on my video conference system, we could just play that STIPA source signal and get a measurement of the intelligibility of the entire conferencing system. To me, that's pretty exciting. But for now, let's focus on STIPA. Let's focus on Speech Transmission Index for Public Address. So STIPA produces an intelligibility index just like STI, but at much less cost in terms of time and processing power and data points. Technology managers can then determine what level of intelligibility is acceptable for their users. So life safety systems, which typically have short and repeated messages, can be as low as 0.55 and still be acceptable. We see that a lot in government work and in commercial buildings. But for executive conference rooms where meetings can last all day, it might be very fatiguing to have systems with a STIPA of less than 0.7. So for our executive spaces, for our collaborative spaces, probably want an intelligibility index of greater than 0.70. We also need to keep in mind that there is a cost to improving the intelligibility of a system, and the technology can only get us so far, right? It'd be cute to say, no, I want my intelligibility to be 0.9. That's I'm very fancy. I need it to be 0.9. The problem with that is it's going to get very expensive to get there. So for room reverberation time, ambient noise, HVAC system balancing, construction materials and methods, all play critical roles in how intelligible a space will be. Improving these criteria can add up quickly, and I think like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Very, very expensive to improve these criteria. So intelligibility requirements need to be carefully considered. However, they should be certainly considered. AQAV, the manager of the AV9000 quality management standard, recommends requiring conference rooms to have at least a STIPA of 0.62. So better than life safety, nothing crazy. And for most small conference spaces where the loudspeakers are reasonably close to the listeners and the room volume is reasonably small with little reverberation, this can usually be pretty easily attained. As designers and installers of audio systems, our focus needs to be delivering intelligible audio that is easy and pleasurable to listen to. By specifying an intelligibility requirement, we are assuring system users that we have their listening enjoyment in mind. It is important to be able to measure intelligibility repeatably to avoid the subjective nature of describing how well a system is reproducing a source signal. It's not enough to rely on opinions, especially when lives are potentially on the line in the case of life safety systems. STIPA offers a relatively inexpensive, rapid, consistent method to provide that measurement for deployed public address systems and perhaps other audio systems as well. So listen, I tried to explain all this to my wife the last time I didn't take the garbage out. I'm not saying this will win you any arguments with your significant other. Actually, it definitely won't. Don't do it. But it might offer them an explanation as to why I wasn't listening. Or at the very least, stun them for a second by the crazy turn the conversation has taken and hopefully lighten the mood a bit. My dad says, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with nonsense. Might be another colorful term that rhymes with full pit, but you get my drift. Bringing up measuring intelligibility during a heated argument with your loved ones might just accomplish both. So at the very least, I encourage you to start specifying how intelligible your audio system should be. So thank you for joining me on this edition of Qualiverse. I encourage you to ask questions. I encourage you to get engaged and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Have an AV day.